My name is Jorgen Gullestrup. I'm the CEO of an organisation called Mates in Construction, and we work in suicide prevention and mental health in the Queensland construction industry, but also nationally. And we do some work in mining, energy, and also a bit of work in New Zealand. And I've been involved with this organisation for the last 13 years. I've got a background, I don't know, you might have picked up that there's a slight bit of an accent. So I was born in Denmark and moved to Australia in 1988 and as a plumber by trade, and have worked in the construction industry in various roles on the tools and more in between as a union official as well. I'm coming to this area with around mental health and suicide prevention, specifically with my own lived experience and my own lived history around this. So it's an area that I'm quite passionate about, both because it's something that is real to me, but also because it's something that is about my tribe. It's about my people, and it's about the people that I identify with as being my industry. So that's sort of the bits that really brought me to what I'm doing today, and the stuff I'm really fortunate to be able to do today.
Yeah, no. And just for a bit of background, put everything in a bit of context, Jorgen and I go back a long way. So I think it was about 2008 or 9, and it was in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. I remember that was a sort of, and I was working for the building industry regulator, the Queensland Building Service Authority as it was named then, and I was organising a tour, a roadshow throughout the state, and invited you to come along to do your thing at all the different venues, and it was so that would have been about 2 years into your sort of journey at that stage. Would that be about right?
Yeah, it would have been right. Yeah.
I just remember it was you were really sort of not struggling to get traction, but it was difficult for you to gain an audience at that particular time, because there was a whole lot of issues floating around. But and from that, you developed a relationship which I certainly had a lot of respect for, in terms of helping you out or providing some assistance for the following years. So it's
a long
nice.
time ago. I distinctly remember. I certainly had a lot more hair back then. You're pretty much the same, but.
Ain't that the truth? So it's and now we're catching up after a long break. So it's almost like this conversation is a bit of framed from my perspective, and going back and you've shared some documents with me, which I've sort of revisited over the last couple of days. Going back and looking at where we're at now, or where you are at now in terms of this major issue. And it brought back some memories in terms of how you represented the situation then. And we'll have a conversation around whether or not there's been any notable changes or trends that you've identified in that period of time, good and bad. But just in the context of and we'll just work through these reports if you don't mind. The first one you gave me to share, and I apologise for looking to the right, but that's where it is this blueprint for better mental health and suicide prevention in the Australian construction industry. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that in terms of how was, what was the collaboration basis and all that sort of thing?
Absolutely, Mark. It's one of the things that when you look at Mates in Construction, we consider ourselves, we have 4 key pillars that support our vision. We believe that we need to be evidence-based, and we need to be informed by the best possible evidence. So we partner with researchers. We need to inform our industry about the facts as they are, and engage people through that level of information. And when people get engaged, we can then work with them to build stronger workplaces. So we get people to volunteer and become connectors and assist workers to actually make a difference and be empowered to make a difference in their own workplace. And we create resilience and stronger workplaces through that. And obviously, as we do that, we identify people who are struggling, and we then support them getting access to the best possible help through case management and 24/7 line and so on. Now, all of those kind of things together give us a level of standing and trust within the industry we operate in. And that then allows us to go back to that industry with further information. And we can then again partner with researchers and use that research to sort of hold a mirror up to the industry and say, this is us, and is that good enough? And so we did, as you rightly recall, we started Mates back in 2007, 2008, and we did the roadshow, and it was hard to get traction because nobody trusted us and nobody believed that it was the right thing to do even. But over the years, we've raised awareness, we've built stronger workplaces, we've connected people up to work, and we've built up that trust. And in 2016, we thought perhaps it's time to say, rather than just pulling people out of the river when they're falling in, maybe we need to look further upstream. Maybe we need to look out, why did we end up there? And to do that, we started a conversation with the industry. So we had a roundtable in Sydney back in 2016, where we got the national leadership of the employer associations together with the national leadership of the unions. So we had William Harness, which was the CEO of Master Builders, sitting with Dave Noonan, the national secretary of the CFMU, and so on, in terms of the plumbers and electricians and all that, and the leadership of the 20 or 30 largest companies in Australia as well, and say, is this good enough? Are we happy with where we are? Can we take it further? And the benefit of getting 50 males in the same room is that it is absolutely chock-a-block full of testosterone. And none of us would settle with just being good. We want to be the best. And we want to be... So the industry has put together a whole heap of things that, no, this is not good enough. We want to be world leaders when it comes to mental health and well-being. We want to be ahead of the curve. We actually want to change the culture. So quite an ambitious plan came out of that. And the industry said, we need a roadmap. We need to know where to start. And to do that, we went back. We did the research together with Melbourne University. We worked together what good evidence would look like for our industry. And then in consultation with the industry, we developed the blueprint for better mental health. And that is much more ambitious. It's looking much further upstream. But it's a document that has that rare standing, up until COVID, where we had joint press releases between Master Builders and the CFMU. Yeah. But for a long time, it was the only document that had joint support between the unions and the employers, in terms that it was endorsed by both sides as being the way forward. And we're really talking to business about whether you are a small plumbing company or whether you are a major multinational building construction company. What are the right standards we want to hold each other to? And the blueprint provides us with a bit of guidance and support around that.
Yeah. It's fascinating what can happen in any sphere, but particularly in the construction industry, when people put their egos to one side and just work for almost the common cause of humanity. You know, it strikes a core that, like you said, Dave Noonan and the boss of Master Builders and all that sort of stuff. It's just... When you get it down to that level, it's a bit like what we've gone through now, quite frankly, in terms of the broader political. We're not bad Australians when it's stripped down to, let's focus on the humanity. Let's put all the rubbish to one side.
I actually think this the construction industry does as well. When we have big problems, we solve it as an industry. Quite often in a lot of other industries, there's a focus, and we do it at enterprise level, and we do it sort of a smaller, more. But we have done some big things as an industry around safety and around mental health at the moment. So it gives me hope. There's some. But the other thing, Michael, is that we need to acknowledge that both employers and unions, you will not have been involved in the construction industry for a period of time without having experienced what we are talking about. It's not an academic exercise of theory. It's actually about pain we have felt. So whether you are Dave Noonan or whether you are William Harnish, this is personal. This is not just industry politics. This is personal. And I think that we have been fortunate, disfortunate in terms of we had these experiences, but in terms of actually getting outcomes, that people have been able to come to the table with those kind of personal experiences.
So let's get the ugly stuff out of the way. The real high level stats, in terms of the construction industry. Do you want to just hit a couple of those high ones?
Well, I think it's important that we know that every day in Australia, more than 8 people die by suicide. So in Australia, even average is pretty bad. Even average is pretty ugly, because each of those people, whether you are a construction worker or whether you are in any other industry, impacts on many, many other people, and the impact is severe and long-lasting. So I think that we need to acknowledge the lived experience people might have had around this, whether construction or not. We have industries that are worse, but I don't want anyone to have to be worst in order to act. Average is bad enough, and even below average is bad enough. But in our industry, we have had the lack of fortune to have had consistently higher suicide rates. 75%, 100%, depending on different times when we have measured, it's consistently been higher than the relative risk for employed men outside the industry. And even within our industry, we've had an anomaly in terms of the highest risk groups, because normally we've had middle-aged men being the higher risk group in society generally, but we have consistently had our youngest workers being the highest risk. So the 15 to 24-year-olds, the ones that we really feel a sense of responsibility for, have consistently had higher suicide rates, and that's really been perhaps an issue that we have been slow in addressing, but we're getting to more consistently now. That's the bad news. The good news is that over the last 12 or 13 years, the relative risk of suicide compared to other Australian men have been falling. So as the industry, what we have been doing, I don't want to claim any causal relationship, because if I own the good times, I'm going to have to own the bad times as well. And I think there's so many other things that impact on people's mental health than just whether we run mates in construction. Mates in construction, part of the picture, but employment conditions and general societal conditions, all of it adds to it. But collectively, what we have done in our industry have led to a result where suicide rates have been falling compared to that of other men in Australia. And that is a good outcome. And I think that we should take comfort from that. But we should not think that the work is finished, because there's a lot more work to be done.
Yeah. We will get onto it when we get into the apprenticeship thing, but I was saying to you off air that different stats jump out at people in different ways. And one of the stats that jumped out at me in terms of the apprenticeship, and don't worry, people will go into that piece of work separately, was there was a stat of like over 50% of the apprentices knew somebody who had committed suicide.
Well, it was actually, yeah.
Sorry, yes, please correct me.
It was actually past 60%, but it was a significant number of people.
It's staggering when you think that they are coming to the workplace or life of work with that sort of rusted on sort of knowledge of their mates and their friends or their acquaintances. It just hit me like, I just said, what is. So it just gets to your point in terms of how prevalent it is in terms of out in society.
But I think in some ways, and I've made the mistake, and that suicide is like a big lake with calm water, and you put a rock in the middle, and it ripples out, and it affects such a broad. It's a really good analogy saying that it actually affects. It might be one event, but it affects so broadly. And so many people are affected by it. I'm careful with that analogy, because people who have lost to suicide saying it's not a ripple effect, it's a tsunami. Yeah. It is something that takes everything you know and turns it upside down, and make you question things, because it's a bereavement that causes you to ask so many what ifs and if only and those kind of questions. So it's a very insidious way of losing someone close to you. But I think really what it highlights is the number of people who are exposed to suicide in our industry means that each suicide affects many, many people. And it means that when we talk about suicide with our industry, we don't talk about this as some sort of academic piece of research. We actually talk about this as something we have felt in our body. And this is why, again, when I come back to the industry, that's why we can get the unions and the employers together about this, because we felt it.
Yeah. No, it's funny because I was just going through your website, and I was looking at your board members, and I saw Wally Traher there, who, by the way, he needs to update his photo. That cannot be the current photo. But Wally was on the board of the BSA, the Queensland Building Service Authority, for many, many years, and I was an executive of that, so I got to know. But one of the things that, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, he always used to say how the massive percentage that he believed was suicide related in terms of the payout of superannuation associated with life insurance. Yep. Is that correct? Is there been some? So that was one of the things that he used to say very early in the piece that just sort of struck me as, wow, you're kidding.
Now, and this was actually, I don't know whether you're aware of this, but this was an important reason that mates were constructed, was formed, was that both the superannuation schemes, but also the redundancy trust, BIRD in this case, were looking at the death certificate they got through with their members, and like 20% of them appeared to be suicide. Now, we need to work out whether that was real or not.
Yeah.
And that was sort of where the research came from. But yes, it's an awful lot of pain.
Yeah. So if I go through this report, then there's influencing factors, and we probably haven't got time to go through them all, but I was just reading, you got work, in terms of the suicide rate in the construction industry, work and employment conditions, relationships, attitudes towards help seeking and stigma against mental health, alcohol and drug use, we might come back to that, sleep and physical activity, literacy levels, and workers from non-English speaking grounds. Then the report, and I'll make sure I pass this report around and we link it and everything like that, goes into each one of those factors. It's the wrong question to ask, but of all those facts, if those factors, if for the purpose of this conversation, you just want to pull out one and put a bit of context into those influencing factors that you might think is more current right now in the crisis that we're about to, we're all living through.
Well, Michael, if I can, I think that's really dangerous because it sort of says that there's a reason for this. Yeah. No, there's not. There's many, many reasons, and all of these reasons together is creating what's happening. I think it's really important that we as an industry, the construction industry, don't beat ourselves up against this. There's a number of things we do that we can influence, and we should really focus on the things we can influence. That doesn't mean that those things that we can influence are the reason. They can help us. But so if I can say, like a lot of the people we have in our industry would perhaps have higher risk of suicide even if they worked in another industry as well. So there's a whole heap of reason that we bring together, just demographic, being a male-dominated industry, being a manual industry, being an industry with many different cultures and all those kind of things. They're known risk factors already. Then we have some things we do within the industry that might then increase that risk factors. And then we have some things some culturally things that we do, how we actually deal with each other in the industry, and they can impact. All of those kind of things together puts it forward, but we can't change the people we are. We are who we are. We come with our background. We can change some of the things we do culturally. So it's about saying, actually, rather than trying to find the reason, let's try to actually look at what can we impact on, what is it we can actually change, because that is much more useful than saying it's this reason or that reason. So we got a financial crisis coming at us with 100 miles an hour. We just got through a health crisis, and obviously, will that impact on suicide rates? Yes, it will. Like we know that. Can we change it? No, we can't. But there's a lot of things we can change. So let's focus on that. Let's make sure that we know what it looks like when one of our mates is struggling. Make sure that nobody has to go through a tough time in our industry alone. That there's always going to be somebody who's prepared to be next to you and show solidarity to you when your chips are down. Those things we can influence. Does that make sense? Yeah,
no, it makes perfect sense. And I thank you for pulling me back into line there, because you can't zero. You're right. They're all factors. They're all equally relevant, and they all. And to a certain extent, you're exactly right. The people that come into the industry are the people who come in the industry. They've got their own particular, traits and characteristics and life experiences, and it is what it is. The thing that one of the things that I always look at when you say, you're right, we can't change everything to do with it, but we can change the way we have conversations with these people. And, from my perspective, coming heavily from an industry regulator's perspective, it always used to tear me up. The regulator's got a job to do, absolutely got a job to do, but it's the way in which that's communicated. And you said something the other day when we were preparing for this, that sometimes you just need to make sure there's a glimmer of hope left on the table. And it can be just a millisecond of hope, and that's enough. And sometimes that can be purely in just the way somebody is treated by your employer, by your bank, by another government another government organisation, by the regulator. And it's a simple, and that to me is just a human thing that we can all bring to the table.
I think, Martin, we have all, I certainly have, but I would say there'd be few people who have not in their lifetime experienced a period of time when things just came at them, one thing after another, after another, after another. And you just try to keep a breath in between, get a breath in between before the next things hit you, because that's just the way it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And for some people, luckily, not most of us, but for some people, when that just happens, and it just extinguishes all hope, and just say none of us want to die by suicide. Like it's not what we set out to do in life, say, I want to get to a point where that becomes my solution. But it's at some stage when you get hit by too many waves and you just can't, it just seems that all hope is gone.
Yeah.
All we have to do is give people a bit of dignity and a bit of hope. And a little hope would get a very, very long way when it comes to keeping people safe around mental health. Just a little bit of hope that things can be different, that this is not the end, this is a phase.
I said to you the other day, and I'm happy to talk about it, I had my own personal storm a few years ago when a tsunami of, like I said, personal storm.
Yeah.
And I thought I was unbreakable, invincible, and everything else. I just never thought it would happen to, inverted commas, me. So, I understand the importance of just taking little baby steps and just understanding that, there's a better time the next day and the next day and the next day. And a lot of that came down, certainly in my case, is the way people treated me, the way people were kind and empathetic to me. So it's probably, it says a lot about the way in which I am very passionate about supporting what you do, and particularly in terms of dealing with the industry regulator. A little bit out of sync here, but I was speaking to Kate Raymond, who's the Assistant Commissioner from the QBCC, who I know well, and Natasha Dennis, in one of these events last week, who's the head of the Financial Investigation Unit in the QBCC. And I made the point that I'm worried, and they're unpacking a whole lot of great information about the compliance and enforcement strategy of the QBCC right now. Yeah. And it's very important because it's going to impact upon people who are under mental stress right now. Yeah. So, my way is to say, well, let's disseminate information, let's get some information out there in a sort of easily understood way, and that might just provide them an opportunity, those people, an opportunity to say, oh, look, there is a way out, or there is something I didn't think of because that was explained to me in a different way. Yeah. And I made the point that, I'm very conscious of trying to make sure that the industry, the people, the regulators and government organisations and banks and everybody else who's doing something with these 230,000 people that are employed in this industry in Queensland, just make sure they get the tone right. They deal with these people as human beings. They're all got jobs, I understand that, and regulators have got to regulate. I get that, no problems. Totally get that. But it doesn't take much to throw in the I hate those template letters that people get sometimes. They're cold.
Yeah.
If there's ever a time that they should be ditched, it's right now. And the QBCC is working through a process where a lot of people are coming up for some sort of a judgment day in terms of their minimum financial requirements or their annual reporting. And it's my hope and desire that those people are treated, and I'm sure they will be. There's good people there with respect.
But it's such a and I think that QBCC have done a lot of work in terms of actually getting across the mental health and being responsible in their role. I think it's a matter of sometimes just taking it. We can very often be very caught up in our processes, and it's really important work that the regulators are doing in terms of making sure that consumers are protected and that the industry is working in a professional manner. So I don't think anyone is disputing the importance of that or say that shouldn't be done. But we have to be careful that it doesn't become the process of driving it, because systems exist for humans. And we really have to say, how does those humans actually interact? But it's so we all do it. Like we do it all the time. We get caught up in inefficiencies about it without always fully appreciate that we're dealing with human beings. And we need to. So if I could say, one of the practices we have for very, very good reasons, we will not do what we call cold calling. So when somebody calls us up on behalf of somebody else, we will not call that somebody else unless that somebody else knows that we are calling, because we have a number of good reasons for that. Because otherwise people think that they're talking behind their back, and that can be quite threatening, and particularly if people have mental health episodes and things like that. So it's really important that somebody knows it's actually showing the care to say somebody's called you and so on. But people call us up online and say, could you call this person or that person for us? And we get really focused on saying we can't call them up. No, we can't cold call people. You have to go and talk to them or whatever. Actually saying, no, the person I'm talking to now is actually the person who has the problem, because they're the ones who are really concerned about one of their mates or one of their people. How do I help them helping their mates? So we all do it, even whether you work in mental health and even, so it's really understandable that you're saying when you work in the regulation, I have some criteria I have to employ, I have to deal with people's license, or, but so we just have to continually remind each other that all of these processes actually exist for the purpose of looking out for humans. Yeah,
that's very true. Okay, so I'm going to just move on to this apprenticeship report.
Yeah.
It's called The Impact of Workplace Bullying on Mental Health and Suicidality in the Queensland Construction Industry Apprentices. People, I will link this and share it around.
Yeah.
So it's a report done by the Australian Institute for Suicide Research and Prevention and Griffith University. So you've got some luminary academics working on this one, I see. But one of the things when I was going through it, and there was a, I'll just pull it up. So I think there was a database of around about 27,000 that was started with.
Yep.
And then there was a response rate of about 1,700.
Yep.
And then some of those had to be sort of just put to one side because they were compromised or not enough data. So the respondent base was 1,483 apprentices, correct?
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
So, and the results indicate that a large proportion, 27.3% of apprentices have experienced workplace bullying.
Yes.
20% experienced severe bullying.
Yep.
And then, I just went, I shouldn't be surprised in a way, but do you want to put any more context around that in those particular results? Or?
Yes, I do. I want to start in a different place, Michael, because I think it's important that we, again, I don't want to knock my industry. I love my industry. It's a great place to work. It's right. We went out to all apprentices. All apprentices in Queensland got the opportunity to answer, and 1,700 participated, and 1,400 were qualified to be part of the sample, which make it a very large sample. So in terms of statistical significance and certainty, it's a very precise sample because of the size of it. The first thing to say is most of the apprentices that responded were really well. Most of the apprentices, more than 76% of the apprentices felt that they were well supervised. More than 70% of them felt that they were well respected by their employers, that they were listened to, and they were respected as a person. So I think that when we talk about this statistics, we have to be careful. We'd say we are talking about a minority. It's a significant minority. It's a worrying minority. But by far, most employers are actually doing a good job and are quite pastoral and looking after their apprentices. So because otherwise we start ending up, this becomes an exercise of beating ourselves up, and I don't want to be part of it. I want to be part of actually getting improvement. Now, that being said, firstly, we have actually discovered there's a slight mistake in the report, and that is it's not 27%, it's actually 30% of offenders that have been bullied. But that was, it was discovered by some sort of, but that's often the case. And what is really most concerning about this is it actually backs up what we know in terms of suicide rates. So what we know consistently from two large studies we've done in the past is that our youngest workers have almost twice the suicide rates as other young employed men in Australia. So what we are talking about here is not an academic exercise of statistics. It is actually something that is a matter of life and death and pain for families on an ongoing basis in our industry, and we really need to ground it in that, because otherwise I do not think we do it justice. 30% of them have been bullied, 20% of them have been systematically bullied. More than 30% of the apprentices had suicidal thought within the last 12 months. The background of that is about 5%. We expect 5% of the population to have a suicidal thought over a 12-month period, 30% of our cohort, which really tells us that we have an issue we need to slap ourselves and wake up to. We looked at in terms of mental well-being. So we measured the apprentices by two measures. Firstly, we measured their well-being, and we then measured their levels of psychological distress. So one of them is a positive measure, the other one is a negative measure. When we came with a positive measure, the WHO-5, we found that 30% of the apprentices scored so low when it came to mental well-being that it would indicate depression. And we found that 13% of the apprentices scored so high when it came to psychological distress that it would indicate severe mental illness. We have an issue amongst our young workers, and as an industry, we must wake up to it and we must act. And this report cannot just be a report that was interested and we then file it under A in the filing cabinet for apprentice. This actually must become a live document, and I think that this document is perhaps as significant as the ASOP report that was delivered in 2006 that became the start for Matrix construction. I think that if we in 10 years' time do not look back at this apprentice report and say, this was a call to action and we acted on it and things have changed, then we as an industry should be condemned for it.
Where is that sort of that strategizing up to now? What's happened in terms of trying to put something concrete on the ground, which is going to move this in the right direction?
The report had 8 recommendations in it. And those 8 recommendations we have taken back out to industry for consultation. We've had submissions on those 8 recommendations from both Master Builders, the CFMEU, the Plumbers Union, the Master Plumbers Association, and so on, apprenticeship groups and so on. And we're now pulling that together into what we consider to be an action plan, and then go back to industry and say, who's actually going to do what? This is not a Matrix construction problem, or we think that we have part of the solution. We think we have something we can add to the industry. But some of these things are structural. Some of these things are actually we need to work out. how come that this has been allowed to happen without us dealing with it? When we look at apprentices, we have a really good system of regulation. They're actually very widely regulated. There's a QBCC that looks at the contracting environment and that they're employed under. That there's actually adequately trained supervisors for them. We have the Department of Training. We have Fair Work Australia. We have workers' work cover. We have the training ombudsman. So there's a lot of regulations around this. And people are represented by unions and employer associations. But despite all of this, we have 30% of apprentices that have this outcome. Is that what we accept? Is that a well-functioning system? Or is it a system failure that we need to have a look at and we need to exit? So we're saying there needs to be a systems review. There also needs to be some cultural review. We need to go out and to be frank, Michael, when we went back 3 or 4 or 5 years, women in the film industry and entertainment industry considered that sexual harassment was a natural part of having a career in the industry, and you were up against powerful men, and if you spoke up against it, you would lose your career. This is actually where we are with apprentices at the moment. Apprentices are exposed to bullying in a lot of cases, and they're telling us that they feel powerless in dealing with it. What happened in the entertainment industry was some brave women started speaking out. Now, they could have continued speaking out, but unless somebody was listening, nothing changed. But actually, when people within the industry started listening, we started having the change, and we started having a cultural change. I don't think that is beyond us in the construction industry. I actually think that if we have a cultural piece that talks to us as workers and as apprentices will start speaking up, and it's our role as an industry to hear them and to believe them. And
it's interesting you say that, and yeah, the same shedding of bad stuff is happening in the legal profession right now, and as a result of some stuff coming out of the High Court, and that's triggered an enormous conversation of epic proportions in terms of where the legal profession is or isn't. It's on exactly the same lines, as what you just said. We cannot be going back in 10 years' time and having results where young female lawyers have exited the industry for whatever reason, for associated with sexual harassment or bullying. It's the same. It's
not okay.
It's not okay. It can't be okay. And when you have these watershed moments, like your report is a watershed moment, and quite frankly, what's come out of the High Court in terms of the legal profession is a watershed moment. And everyone will be damned unless there are significant movements in the right direction in 5 or 10 years' time on all these industries.
I think so, but in that we need to make sure, Michael, that we are measured and that we are reasonable. I think we need to make sure that just like in it's not all judges and all lawyers who sexually harass female staff, and it's not all apprentices, supervisors, but some does. And when that happens, it happens to people who are in a vulnerable position, and it's the people who are bystanders who have the responsibility to act.
No question about that.
Yeah.
And a lot of it comes back to, young people need to feel valued. That's my way of thinking about it. So if they're just going to be given meaningless jobs because the supervisor was giving meaningless jobs, that's sort of that passed down sort of. That's what happened to me when I was apprenticeship. I had to go off and get the boss's lunches, and all that was about as that was my sort of rights to this. Well, that to me is just that's starting off on the wrong basis. These people are highly talented, highly intelligent, and they bring so much to the table. You got to if they feel valued, well then valued for the right reasons. Well then you've got the basis of a good relationship.
Michael, when I started as a plumbing apprentice, I was a typical plumbing apprentice. I dropped out of school halfway through grade 9. I did that because I was absolutely hopeless. One thing I learned in school was how dumb I was. And
Me too.
and that was the most lasting lesson I ever got, you know. And I started an apprenticeship, but that was absolutely typical. There was, and so I was 15 years old, and I expected a certain level of bullying, and I you know, whether that was right or wrong, the apprentices we have now are not 15 years old anymore. The apprentices we have now are no longer school dropouts. They have completed year 12. They have a driver's license. They have often even on their second career. We can't have a system that is still designed for 15-year-old kids. We actually need to look at that.
I'm going to take a couple of questions here, and there's a okay. Just got to read these, make sure. I'll just put this in context. We've got one of our young lawyers is over in the UK, been over the UK for a couple of years on a sort of working holiday thing. We're trying to drag her back as quickly as she can, and she's still working for us. So she's a construction lawyer. So this is coming via her to one of our other young lawyers, one of our legal clerks, Teresa. So, hi, Jorgen. I've been doing a bit of research on the United Kingdom's COVID-19 circumstances and came across Moodbeam, wristbands which are being used to gauge how contractors are feeling on site. I was wondering whether there are any plans to introduce something similar in the Australian construction industry. Sorry, mate, it's random, but...
Well, I would question why we would do it.
Yeah.
Because I think it is important that we actually have an awareness that not everybody is going to have a good day every day. So where it's coming from, I think, is the right place. We need to know that we're turning up to work, and sometimes we're turning up to work in a great space, and sometimes we're turning up to work in an absolute awful space. Work is a great place to intervene because we will go to work until the last bit of hope has been sniffed out of us, because so much of our hope sits in work. So that's really good. Now, I think that perhaps rather than wristbands, we should get to a point where we actually make it a natural part of the conversation to say, how are you really, Michael? And I actually care. And I want to know that, because I think that once we have that, one of the things that when I said before, when you talked about what was the reason behind this, in suicide prevention, we have spent an awful lot of time to try to identify all the risk factors for suicide. And the idea was, if we could actually get the risk factors for suicide, we could diagnose suicide, and we could get up in front of the curve, and we could identify people before they acted on it. We have been a hopeless failure in doing that. It cannot be done. We cannot predict suicide that way because humans are so individual, and things like, what, I'm totally all right today, get a phone call, you can't have the kids this weekend, boom, everything starts again. Well, the only thing we have found is effective is to ask people when they are suicidal, are you suicidal? Are you struggling now? So wristbands is a good thing, but it would rely on me not trusting you enough to tell you. And I much rather want to work on the thing where we're saying we actually have to create an environment, whether it is within the legal profession or whether it's within the construction industry, where mental health becomes so normal that I'm saying I'm having a bad back and I'm having a bit of heartache as well. Yeah. That is actually okay because it happens to all of us. So I'm just a little bit concerned about trying to diagnose people, and that's sort of a little bit where we're going with the wristbands.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So just going through this apprenticeship, one of the things that I saw, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but when you dived into some of the stats, like I said, we already mentioned that, awareness, that suicide awareness of apprentices, there were some trades which were worse than others, and was plumbing was plumbing one of the ones which came up here? And is there any reason for that, or is it just a stat which is a stat?
There's probably a reason, but I don't know what it is. In general, there was a few areas. There was electricians and finishing trades in some areas in terms of metal. distress and plumbing in terms of bullying, I think it was. So different trades had a sort of a... most of it had no statistical significance in terms of the differences, but those ones stood out. I think that they are perhaps. I think we have to be careful about going into too much details about that. What was interesting to me was that perhaps smaller employers tended to fare better than very large employers, and to me that was a surprise, because that was counterintuitive. I would actually thought very large employers would have systems and measures in place, and that was a little bit of a surprise. But no, I don't think. One of the things that was significant was that there was a significant connection between unemployment, poor mental health, well-being, suicidality, and bullying. Those kind of things are almost like, and I think that is perhaps the most important thing to take on board, is that the people who don't survive the system and become unemployed for that reason are in a really bad place. Or alternatively, the people who are in a bad place tend to become unemployed. We don't know whether it's a chicken or egg.
Chicken or the egg, okay.
Yeah. But I think there's something really significant about the links between unemployment and poor outcomes for apprenticeships that we need to understand better. I think the differences between industry sectors are interesting, but I don't know that they're going to be too helpful to us.
No, I just one of those, how stats jump out at you sometimes. Yeah. I'm looking and thinking, what the hell? Why?
I thought it was good. You can sort of hit somebody over the head with it. You're the worst, but I think that like we should obviously be conscious of it. But
it's what you said there about unemployment is, that's pretty scary in terms of what period we are potentially about to go into now in terms of the construction industry. I think has been, as a result of this particular recession, and it is a recession, has been largely protected to date because it's had ongoing work and it's continued working through all the lockdowns, even though there's been productivity down. That doesn't matter, it's continued. And when it's obviously everybody's been supported by the job keeper.
Yeah.
I do fear what's going to happen, September onwards, in terms of if the tap's turned off, in terms of if it's turned off too brutally in terms of JobKeeper.
Yep.
And then contracts. I think we'll see a very patchy industry going forward. I think contractors who deal with governments will do well, or councils will probably pick up a lot of work. The residential sector maybe as a result of some of the initiatives that have been thrown on there, but I've got some problems about that. But I think there'll be segments which just won't pick up any of that sort of stimulus or any of that sort of activity. And with JobKeeper off, I just don't know what's going to happen.
I think that Scott Morrison said something early in this question, and it was absolutely right. And that is that financial crisis kill people. We have had people dying from the health crisis we've been going through. We've done extremely well in dealing with it, I think, by any international comparison, and the leadership we've received both at the state and federal level has been very good like that. But we are going to a financial crisis, and I think there's a likelihood that the financial crisis will actually end up being more fatal than the health crisis we've just been going through. And we just have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, it is so. So just onto your flyer, which you were good enough to share with me in terms of its draft form and everything like that. So this is, what was your idea? What's your idea behind this flyer? It's a flyer to go to employers, essentially, about what a little bit of sort of something almost like a pocketbook, reckoning in terms of what you can do on site, what you can't do on site. You explain to me what you.
What is happening is that we've been around for 12, 13 years, and we are largely a demand-driven organisation, which means that we have networks of volunteers, and they take us from site to site. And so, but it also means that if you don't make conscious change, you're going to remain the same. And we were more and more aware that we are missing out on the smaller businesses and the smaller sites and the smaller groups of workers, because they did not have the same networking and they did not have the same pull factor for us. So over the last 2 years, we have really consciously said, how do we actually engage with small businesses? So we devised programs that allows us rather to run presentations on site, as we've been doing. We can run toolbox talks over the bonnet of a ute. We can engage with 5 or 6 workers rather than 30 or 40 workers. And we then say, so we've got these tools, and we have really, because we have this ethos about evidence-based, we spend a lot of time actually researching them and developing them and making sure that they are effective in terms of evaluation. We have not succeeded actually getting a wide coverage within the smaller enterprise, and we have an ethos around us that tend to be for the bigger end of town. We're not. We're for all of the industry. Mm. So what we are working on that brochure is actually saying, can we get to people like QBCC, people like Master Builders, people like HIA, people like WorkCover, and say to them, here's something you can send to your membership, because your membership want to look out for mental health and well-being of their workers as well. Can we actually use their trust in you to get in contact with them? Can you help us with that? And that's really what we are working on in that pamphlet, saying actually, can we get a tool out there that these organizations that have contacts with those smaller businesses at a trust level say, yep, that's actually a way, because we want to pull in the same direction. We want better mental health. We want to prevent suicide. How do we actually get to them?
Yeah, it's so important, and I see you've sort of you got to draw a line somewhere, but you've got above 15 workers and below 15 workers in terms of in your below 15 is your modified, if I can call it your modified version of the program that you've pushed out so far. But it gets back to those smaller guys, those small to medium guys. If I can go back to sort of a bit of a tsunami issue that's coming for the QBCC, there's about 70,000 contractors in Queensland who have to meet the minimum financial requirements for licensing. And some stats I saw the other day, about 50,000 to date have done so. Yep. Means there's about another 20,000 to still go through this annual reporting process. Mm-hmm. And the annual reporting process, which is still alive at the moment, is for essentially the most majority of what they call the self-certifying categories, the people who are turning over up to $800,000. So these are contractors. These are contractors, and also up to 30 million. So there's some of the bigger guys. But my concern is that those people need to be managed very carefully leading up to a sort of a deadline that's going to be the 31st of December. Because a lot of those are not, they've got contractors' licenses, but they're actually the employees. There's no way in the world, so they keep their contractor's license in the hope that they'll get a business, or they'll just keep it. But they're essentially employees. Yeah. Now, if they aren't managed properly in the context of this deadline, and if they're an employee, so they've got their work might be drying up as a result of their employer not getting, and all of a sudden they're seeing this sort of avenue of potential trouble brewing over here in terms of annual reporting and minimum financial requirements to just keep their contractor's license. It's managing those smaller guys that I worry the most about going forward in this whole situation. So everyone it's the banks have got an obligation as far as I'm concerned. Government regulators have got an obligation. Everyone's got an obligation to see how we're going to help these smaller people. And don't just look at the situation in the context of your silo. Understand that there's other things happening in their life, which could be directly industry related, which could have major consequences in terms of their future. From making sense.
Where's the impact on? I think that there's a good reasons for having financial conditions on contracts. There's a good reason for having a bar there, but I know for myself, when I was working on the tools between jobs, you go out and do a weekend or two and whatever. You had your license and you went out and did a few jobs and you make a bit of coin. And I used to be on the plumbers and drainers licensing board for a long time, but I used to say my primary role for being on the board was to make sure that people like me couldn't keep their license, because I was always a pretty bad plumber, actually. So I often think back on the weekend job I was doing, and I probably shouldn't have. But I think a lot of people in the industry work on sites and go and do that, and they then have that license as a bit of a relief valve. And now there's an additional condition, and now they might not actually be out contracting at this stage. But it's a little bit of hope. My job is drying up, but I know that I can always do that, and I can always do that if this happens to me or whatever. So it is something that needs to be managed. I think we need to be aware that there's some reality out there in terms of what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's just that sort of awareness that, and it sort of triggered you for these little ones, if you work through the industry associations and the QBCC and everything like that, I think it's a good ready reckoner for those organisations too, to think in the context of, well, what am I doing? How can I change the narrative? Can I do something other than just be a pusher out of dissemination of information on behalf of...
How can we actually actively take part in this?
Yeah, how can I just really join in and say, okay, what are the processes and procedures? I'm not saying ditch the laws. I'm not saying that at all. But what are the processes and procedures, how I can deal with these people in a more humane way right now? So, yeah, join in, not just be a postbox in terms of, yep, got it, flick it out. And I just think unless that's happening, I just worry that there'll be people who...
We've had some of the best stories I've had to share have been about... When QBCC have been dealing with contractors at that stage where the license was at risk, and we spoke to master builders about this, and I was told regionally, I was told about the story where he was going to a meeting with QBCC as a support from one of his members, and he said, well, it doesn't look good for your license, but you have to understand that this doesn't mean it doesn't look good for everything else, and it's not going to be an easy meeting, but here's a number for major construction, and you've got some support for what. And they started the meeting, and as they started the meeting with QBCC, the QBCC started saying, well, this is probably not going to be a pleasant meeting. We've got some things we need to talk about, but this is not the end of it. We give you the number for major construction, and you can actually support. So we're not taking away what needs to be done, but we need to actually accept that this is very personal for the person it's done to. And we need to make sure that it's done with adequate support for that person.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Look, there's some questions here. I think we've probably covered most of them in the context of our free-ranging talk.
How do
you want to finish up? Is there? Hang on, Is there one good thing that has surprised you over the last 13 or 14 years? Is there something which has just come out at you when you started this journey? And is there something which has just totally surprised you in terms of being, wow, that's good, I didn't think I'd see that?
It never, ever ceased to surprise me what ordinary workers are doing of extraordinary things when we just share the basic skills to do it. Like some of the stories we're getting back from the people we are working with is mind-blowing and is superhuman. And that tells me that we're onto something here, that actually trusting workers within our industry to be the solution to our own problems, or being part of the solution to their own problems, is the exact right thing to do. We were, when we started MATE 17 years ago, it was a plumber and a school teacher working with a social worker about what could possibly look like a good idea, and it was all sort of put together. But we thought that we were onto something, but actually the way what workers are using this for and what people are doing with it is just so encouraging and so great. And I'm looking at, we're going into to fly the flag now, where in September, ordinary workers on ordinary sites on hundreds and hundreds of sites across Queensland will conduct mental health events for their own workmates taking a pledge to look out for each other. Well, I don't think I could ever have hoped for that when we started. It's just a testament for. It's a great industry we're in, Michael. That's the reality of it. It's a great industry that we are in, and we just need a bit of help. And that tells me that we're going to get it right with the apprentices as well.
On that note, and I'm so glad we finished on this positive note, because you're right. It is a great industry. You know, we all love it. We all care about it passionately. You're an extraordinary person, Jorgen. I know you're not going to say it yourself, but you're an extraordinary person. I've had the privilege of watching you, on your personal journey, but also your involvement in growing this great organisation. It's an organisation which everybody can just jump on and embrace, but all sides of politics, big unions, big employers. It's like I said at the very beginning, it's underpinned by just humanity, people being good to other people, and it's just a remarkable thing that you've achieved. So thank you very much. It's been wonderful having this hour chat. Like I said, I think I said it offline, we'll cut up a lot of these little segments up, and we'll float them around, and I'll make sure that you see them, and we'll share them with you on your various social media platforms. But thank you, and all the best, mate.
Oh, it's great to catch up again, Michael.
Thanks, Jorgen. Take care.
Take care. Yeah. See ya. Bye.